Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, How UK Tech Can Take and Maintain the Lead in 2025. By this point, it feels like we've been in a period of rapid change for years, but it genuinely has really accelerated since 2022. Technologies like AI, plus very recently shifting geopolitics, are changing the world on a scale that we haven't seen in decades. And now, with the UK taking its place as a bridge between the USA and Europe, we can't afford to be complacent. The Labour government has already signalled a big AI drive, but is that the best way to take and maintain the European tech crown? That's just one of the questions we'll be discussing today. We're also going to look at the country's existing competitive advantages and how UK companies can address industry-wide challenges. So, joining me to discuss these topics and many, many more are Barry McMahon, Director of Product Marketing, EMEA at Slack, a Salesforce company, and Richard Nolan, the Chief Operating Officer and Chief People Officer at EPOS Now. So I'm going to hand over to Barry and Rich for their own introductions. Barry, why don't you take it away?
Cheers, Tom. Barry McMahon, based in Dublin. I look after Slack product marketing for EMEA. It's been an interesting few months, particularly around Slack and also around Salesforce. All conversations are around AI and agents, productivity, use cases, and so on. So, very glad to be on this webinar today, talking about the challenges and promise that AI and technology can bring, not just the UK, but globally as well. So,
yeah, thanks, Barry. Richard.
Thanks, Tom. Richard Nolan, COO and CPO of EPOS Now. EPOS Now is a global fintech that has scaled into over 100 territories around the world, offering point-of-sale technology and true embedded finance, everything from banking, capital, issuing, lending. I've worked predominantly as a CPO for around 15 years. And was part of the board at the Hook Group, scaling them to circa 15,000 heads around the world, with a huge focus on the talent development within the technology and development sector. So really, really excited to delve into this topic.
Great. Thank you both. Okay, so just one point of housekeeping before we kick off. A few people have already submitted questions, which is great. I encourage the rest of you to do the same. You can submit one using the button right below my face now. So please do put your questions in as and when. We'll get to them when we have time. So I'm going to start off with a nice big broad general question to get us started. Perhaps I'll aim this one at both of you. Let's again start with Barry. What do you see as the UK's biggest competitive advantages for the tech industry?
I think, the UK and Ireland, to be fair, but particularly around the UK, I think it is a launch pad into the rest of Europe for a lot of US companies and US organizations. And what we do see is a lot of the big tech companies taking footprint, and even startups, right, and scale ups taking footprint in the UK and similar type markets because of the concentration of technology that's there, because of the concentration of skills that are there and so on, right? They're going to the markets where they can leverage what's already available to them rather than having to bring all the skills and everything into the markets themselves. So I think I see that as a big advantage. I also see like the UK is a big powerhouse globally in tech and in finance and in a couple of other big sectors as well. And so that can also spin out a lot of different innovation, right? That can be harnessed. We see AI and agents and agentic capabilities and so on is the tip of the tongue for everybody right now. Everybody's trying to figure out how they bring that into their business, how they can be more productive, how they can gain competitive advantage, and so on. And with the size of the organizations and the talent, as I said, and the tech and the investment that's in the UK, I think all of them are kind of catalysts for really giving the UK competitive advantage in EMEA and across EMEA. I think obviously you can't do that unless your government is taking it fairly seriously in terms of a field that they want to address and an area that they really want to get into. And I know the UK has launched an AI opportunities action plan, right, that they want to get after and they want to do over the next number of years, so that they make sure that the UK isn't missing this particular opportunity. So I think there's a lot of elements there that are the right ingredients to really be the catalyst for change for the UK and put them on the front foot. And I think there are some of the real competitive advantages that they have at their disposal.
Okay. I'm going to come to you in 1 second, Richard, but I just want to follow up with something that Barry said there, because obviously you mentioned Ireland. A lot of what you said there could also justifiably be applied to Ireland, where a lot of these US tech companies have their European headquarters. So which would be the more attractive market? Is it the UK? Does that provide the bridge to Europe, or are people going to use Ireland, where which is already in the European Union?
Yeah, look, and I think it depends, right? Like, there's the two islands are very close to each other, right? There's not a big divide between them. A lot of organizations like Salesforce, right, who I'm employed by, have footprint in both markets. So I don't think there's a huge difference between them. I think what ends up and what will be the driver is the skill set and the availability of skills. Like in Dublin here, we see the likes of Google and all these other big organizations, the same in London. And they have access to the skills market. I think that's the most important thing. And because both nations are English speaking, I don't think it's a huge gap between the two. I think it's preference of market, preference of access to opportunity, right? And maybe the UK has the edge on that, given the scale of the footprint of technology and organizations that are based there.
All right, great. Thank you, Barry. So, Richard, same question to you. What are the UK's competitive advantages? And perhaps I'll follow up with how can they leverage those to make the UK a more attractive place for US companies than Ireland?
I echo everything that Barry just said. Geographical location absolutely is the forefront, the accessibility of talent. I think what the UK has done good to build this competitive advantage is it has been the first to move. For many, many decades, it's been at the forefront of building talent programs, development programs, government initiatives, embedding digital skills within the education establishment in the UK has really harnessed a big focus on good employment. And by good employment, I mean sustainable skills that enable people to build a career. And I think the UK government has particularly not always got this right, but have always been pushing the initiatives to enable this to be successful. I think at the same time, government policy and the willingness to collaborate with startups, with growth businesses, with innovative businesses are attributing to organizations like, DeepMind, very forward-thinking AI company based in the UK. Why? It's because it's got the accessibility of talent. And I think, especially when the UK was a part of the EU, what you tend to find was a big influx of highly capable and competent individuals come into the UK, sourcing jobs and creating their livelihoods in the UK to build careers. And I do think with not only the government policies, the growth focus, and the influx of talent to the economy has set the UK up to have a talent-led competitive advantage.
Okay, if I were just to play devil's advocate for one moment, because I agree with what you're both saying, but we have seen companies like DeepMind being bought by US tech companies. Same with, in a similar way, Darktrace was acquired by venture capital in the USA. Arm, another big success story, listed on the NASDAQ rather than the London Stock Exchange. So is that a threat to the UK tech scene? Should the government be helping these companies more to remain properly headquartered in the UK? Who do I want to throw that to? Let's stick with Rich.
Do I think it's a threat or do I think it's an opportunity? It's probably both, in my view, Tom. I think, yes, you do see that the UK and the US typically values organizations slightly differently. And you do see a lot of the UK organizations that are looking to do some form of raise, some form of process, tend to lean towards the US because they're more aggressive on valuations. And let's be brutally honest, they have a much more scaled economy than the UK in isolation. And normally what people tend to do is lean towards US valuations because that's where they can get the value of the org. I think if you look at a lot of the organizations that have been acquired or had investment in from US investors, this isn't new. This has been going on for decades. But secondly, what I tend to see is when investment takes place, they double down in the UK and they grow the organization regardless of where the funds have come from. They tend to see that the ability and access of talent in the UK continues to grow.
Right. Do you genuinely agree with that point?
Yeah, I'd agree with it. Like, look, my own opinion is that companies are going to get acquired, regardless. Where they get listed and so on. Maybe that's just a little bit more to do with the scale of the opportunity that they can get more exposed to, right? Like, if you get listed in the US, and that opens up the US market for more exposure, more opportunity, and so on. Brilliant. Like, that's brilliant for your business. It's brilliant for everybody involved. It's brilliant if you want to get acquired. It helps you scale. I think overall it's a good news story, right? For me, I would like to think of it that as long as the technology, I guess, isn't made exclusive to certain parts of an industry or so on, that it can be used in a broad scope, right? That is, that something really innovative that would make a huge difference in the SMB space doesn't just get locked out and is only then exposed into a large enterprise space. I think that wouldn't be great. I wouldn't be a huge fan of that. But yeah, like, once it allows it to scale and bring something innovative to market, I think it's good, in the broader ecosystem for the long term. I think it'll ultimately end up spawning more innovation. Where a company gets acquired from, if they get acquired in the UK or in Ireland or wherever they get acquired from, it automatically draws a lot of eyes to that particular part of the world anyway, and other companies then can benefit from investment and opportunity as well. So I think it's a tide that rises all boats.
Okay, fair enough.
Can I just add to Barry's point there? I think as kind of if I go back to the times when I was speaking to entrepreneurs, especially when they're speaking to investors looking at coming to raise funds, I think a lot of the conversation that takes place from an entrepreneur's perspective is, what can the investor do for me? And I think for UK companies, one of the most challenging things that they've typically seen, especially in the fintech space, is how can I go and access the largest English speaking territory that exists in the world? And that is the US market. And you've seen a lot of UK businesses struggle to capitalize on entry into the US market. And I think having the backing of a potential US investor could be very attractive because they will be able to provide insights, cultural awareness, which I think is underserved when entering the US market. But I think that level of value is quite significant, and also means that they can scale their business in equally one of the easier markets from a language point of view from the UK to go and penetrate. If you look at where you could go elsewhere, you could go into Europe, but if you're then taking your technology into the European territories, you're talking multiple languages, you're talking additional complexity, which sometimes could put potential entrepreneurs off.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to work in the TV industry, and a common sort of truism in that industry is that Asian companies, because most TVs are made in Asia, would treat the US as a single market, which of course it is, but they would treat the EU as a single market as well, which it is in terms of trade. But once you get in there, there's a lot of differences between all those different sovereign states. So definitely trading with the European Union is different from the USA. So we've kind of come back around here to UK's competitive advantages. So perhaps I'll just ask you a follow-up question, both of you. How can the UK maintain its competitive edge that we're seeing at the moment? We've got great R&D funding. We're geographically in a good place. We're English speaking, of course. So those two things aren't going to change. But what can this still relatively new government do, and companies do, to maintain these existing competitive advantages to attract new investments, say?
Look, I can take that one to start off. I think, a commitment to a long-term plan is important, right? There's a lot of energy right now and a lot of excitement around AI and so on, right? It's I guess, when you look at Gartner's hype cycle, right? It's right up there at the top of the hype cycle. Maybe it's slightly on its path down to the trough of disillusionment, right? Anybody that's familiar with Gartner. So I think it's commitment to the tech, the commitment to the promise of tech, and taking the risk to be on the front foot with it. Like the UK has a couple of fairly good plans, like we just discussed around different action plans and AI action plans and investment and so on. You need commitment to that for the long term for it to really yield changes in just not the tech sector, but in the broader economy. And so that's what I'd say. It's commitment and doubling down on the plan and seeing it through to fruition, right? The worst thing that could happen is that there's a lot of really good energy around it and a lot of really good talking around it and a lot of really good early investment and so on, and then it kind of just drops off a cliff. So, for me, it would be to commit and maintain the plan over the long term, over like a 10, 15-year period.
Great. Thanks, Barry. Richard.
I will break this into three verticals. Number one, the government needs to continue to invest into infrastructure. Something that the UK, I think, has started to lag against many competitors globally. But investing into infrastructure, digital infrastructure, internet connectivity, which we know is on the agenda, just needs to happen faster, being frank. I think number two, for me, has to be a clear policy decision. And the government has kind of inferred it's made a decision on what the AI framework will mean and will do. But I think it's lacking some of the clarity that is needed to enable these policies to add value and provide direction. The UK's got the advantage at the moment because it can skip a lot of the red tape that the likes of the EU and probably the US have. We can make a decision and spearhead the opportunity to capitalize. I think the most important one for me is for the government policy to champion and foster collaboration. And by fostering and championing collaboration, I'm talking about getting closer relationships between the education system and the workplace, getting better collaboration between entrepreneurs that are growing businesses and using innovative technology with other partners that might not necessarily be in competition, but can help innovation generally. And looking at things like how they can build new digital skills. And we talk about AI a lot, but the reality is we know it will come into, and it is in many of our lives day to day. But really, is anything within the infrastructure of government and policy changed? Probably not, but we're all using it. So we really want to be able to champion that and make it clear of what the agenda looks like and how we can bring this to life. And how can organizations really go and use this technology? I think there's great businesses out there, Salesforce, Slack, great example where they're leading the charge. But this business is built on a backbone of SME organizations. The country is founded by them. So how can you place this within the small to medium sector? And how can you enable adoption across the country rather than, just individuals that have access to it?
Okay, well, we've quite naturally now come around to AI. So let's carry on with this conversation. We've already got a nice number of questions coming about artificial intelligence. So clearly people want to know about it. Rich, I'll stick with you. We're talking now, I think, about what the tech sector, the UK tech sector specifically, needs to do to embrace the opportunity that we're seeing from AI and the new sort of facet of that, AI agents.
What can we do? Make a decision. As a country, we need to be clear on what we need to do. And I think the first thing for me is the skills gap. The benefit of AI is, and the value that I see in artificial intelligence is, it's got the great opportunity of leveling the playing field. So individuals that didn't previously have access to knowledge, to information, now have access to the best source of data and intelligence. So when I think about what we can do to embrace this, is really starting to think about how we could evolve the education system to address future skill gaps on a go forward, leveraging technology that leverages the leveling of the playing field to make this work. I think the UK government's been very clear already around, automation of laborious tasks. Why is this exciting? I think there's this fear factor that there'll be mass unemployment. No. Yes, there will be the replacement of certain jobs in society. We know that. That's been happening for decades. Let's be clear. But I think this also allows companies in the UK to refocus on high value. And by high value, I mean roles that enable creativity, roles that enable innovation, roles that enable the ability of pushing over the boundaries that they couldn't previously do. So I think enabling the technology, enabling the skills, enabling the agenda that pushes people to embrace technology that is coming through, I think would be the starter for me.
Okay. Barry, there's a question here that quite nicely leads on from that, from Blake, one of our viewers, which is, how can AI agents help businesses scale effectively? So AI agents, for anyone who doesn't know, are little AI tools that can go and actually do things. They're not just chatbots that will give you advice. They can go away and book a holiday for you, or book a GP appointment, that kind of thing. So yeah, Barry, how can businesses use AI agents to hit that new level of scale that Richard was talking about?
So I think that's probably starting at the end in terms of how can you use an AI agent to scale your business. I think there's a whole lot of other cultural and behavioral things that need to be kind of put out in the open, and people, acknowledge them before you can really get people and agents to scale your business, right? We have, just to touch on what Richard said, right? We talk about the education sector, right? Currently in business, people don't want to admit that they're using AI in their everyday work, and everybody's doing it, right? They don't want to, because they feel like it's cheating. They feel like, they're becoming less competent. Their fear of being seen as lazy, all these different things, right? And Salesforce and Slack have done, loads of market research on this globally, right? Loads of people want to use it, but people actually feel ashamed, if you like, about using it, and don't want to tell people that they're using it because they feel less competent, right? And why we need to change that. That needs to change even before anybody comes out of the education system. Because when people when people leave the education system, I kind of say they're going to be like AI native, right? They're going to be even more digitally native people than what we have in our current business today. And so when they enter the business, management need to be able to figure out how to use them best within the business, right? If you have an organization right now that is so far removed from actually having AI embedded in everything that their people do, be it applications be it like Writer AI or Cohere or Perplexity AI or ChatGPT, if they're so far removed from having that in their business and they're starting to hire in graduates that are coming out of these universities, they're not going to be able to attract the right skill. All right. So scaling your business is all well and good talking about scaling your business. You need to change the behaviors within your business to start with. It's a little bit like cloud computing 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? Or what became cloud computing. As an IT guy told me one time, you're just using someone else's computer, and we've been doing that forever and a day. But cloud computing, right, when that really came out, everybody was really worried about it was going to completely disrupt, it was going to completely change, people were going to lose their jobs and so on. The reality of what happened for the most part was people actually got on with more strategic things than trying to keep lights on servers blinking green all the time. So there needs to be a fundamental change, right? We talk about wanting our people to work smarter, not harder. The smartest way that people can work is by leveraging AI in some way, shape, or form, right? Being innovative. Companies talk about shadow IT. I think of shadow IT and I go, yes, there's an element of shadow IT, but there's also an element of IT coming into the business because the tools that you're giving your people to work right now aren't fit for purpose, right? So do we want to keep, looking at people over an 8, 10, 12-hour working day, right? Whatever the working days may be globally, wherever people are. Do we want to keep measuring people over that, the amount of hours that they're online, or do we want to reward them and look at it in terms of the outcomes that they deliver? They deliver the same outcome in 30 minutes or 40 minutes that normally would have taken 4 hours. That's something that this should be championed about, right? And that's a completely different mindset for an awful lot of organizations. Now, when you do that, yes, you can then start to look at how do you help your AI business scale, because you're going to be getting the right people with the right skill sets into your business that can go, okay, we need to completely rethink how we've done our business here. We need to completely rethink how we go about assessing our competitive advantage, our speed to market around our product, even how we go through our CRM systems, for argument's sake, to go, well, here's a place that we keep failing, here's a trend that we see, here's a way that we can gain competitive advantage, here's a way we can increase our sales cycle velocity. There's loads of ways that you can get AI agents to scale your business. If you can think of a way of being more efficient, you can get an AI agent to ultimately help you be more efficient. But I think fundamentally, it's changing the behaviors and the culture within the business from day one. I think that's where organizations are going to have a huge challenge. You can deploy agents into your business, but if people aren't going to behave in the right way and adopt the right culture, then you're just going to have an agent there that's not going to be doing anything. That would be my.
So this could quite easily turn into a political discussion about increased productivity, the 4-day work week, and reduced working hours. But that is a little bit outside the scope of what we're going to talk about in this webinar. So instead, I think I'll throw it over to Rich here. So what Barry is mostly saying, I think, is emphasizing the need for correct policy, correct frameworks, and training on AI systems. I'd love to hear your response to that, Rich.
Tom, to start, can I give a practical example of how we've done this? Because I think that might provide some context. And I know Slack do very similar things. The one thing I would say that I think most organizations that are trying to adopt evolving technology in their business is lack of intent. So there's so much hype out there, and there's so much opportunity, but sometimes putting that opportunity in pen to paper, they struggle. I look at most organizations that are adopting AI, and weirdly enough, they demonstrate this game-changing technology, and all of a sudden they present me a very similar looking ChatGPT style environment that is kind of doing the same thing through an API into ChatGPT. For us, what have we tried to do? And we've deployed many agents at EPOS now, but I'll focus on one that really hones us on the skill gap. So we, as an organization, have a complex product, and it's a product that requires high trust. Banking. We're dealing with money, we're dealing with transactions, we're dealing with payments. And that means that we have to be on point when it comes to supporting our customers. We are the individuals responsible to enable their organization to be successful. What we did when deploying our first agent was we led an agent that sat over the top of all of our communication that took place between our frontline customer service reps and our customers directly. What the purpose of that is to provide insight. That's how it started. We provided insight to the business to say, you had X number of calls related to X. Here is an overview of what that conversation looked like. Okay, brilliant. This could just be a fact that the customer didn't know how to find this particular report. Can we just evolve our product just to stop that call from happening? Or they couldn't reconcile their payments correctly. Can we evolve how we evolve our product to enable that just not to exist? What happened very quickly is we realized the ability of automating that flow was huge. So we automated our frontline support through voice technology and through chat-based technology, which is fine. That's kind of old hat. But what that did for us as an organization, it allowed us to remove 60% of our frontline demand. That 60% then enabled us to reallocate our resource into product. So what we've seen since then is we've really pushed innovation and creativity, and individuals that otherwise would have just been on repetitive repeat calls, and they're now directly taking feedback from the agents that exist to improve our product. So I think from my perspective, when I see individual organizations trying to come up with ideas, it's all around intent. When you critique what they're trying to deploy, they don't really know the purpose of what they're trying to deploy, what the value is, and how that all works. And I think for us, it's that's been the biggest learner is organization going there, decide what you want to do, decide how you're going to measure it, decide what the purpose is, and then be creative, but take a risk. Like the opportunity is there to capitalize on.
Okay. I think you are best placed to answer this next audience question that's come in from Aidan. Thanks, Aidan. So Rich, how can companies foster AI literacy among employees? And it sounds like you've been doing a really good job of that. So we'd love to hear what you've done.
So the first thing, even before you talk AI, unfortunately, within most organizations and society as a whole, there is a stigma. So AI is it's iRobot. It's the return of the robot that's going to take away employment, and no one's going to have a job, and everything's going to be automated. We're nowhere near that. Just putting that out there to put that conversation to bed. I think AI gives the ability of increasing productivity, and that's what I think is exciting. For organizations that are going to deploy AI and deploy literacy around what the opportunities are, be open and transparent with the organization. So when I talk about intent, for us, even before we started building the technology, we had very clear steering groups with the individuals that were doing the role previously to say, look, we're looking at seeing how we can get greater value from this. Can you help build this proposition with us to help us deploy a technology that might enable you to get more involved in more exciting parts of the organization? Because we engaged with them right from the off, they were very excited about the fact that we were deploying technology. How do we get literacy and opportunities there? Being blunt, as a leadership team, we went out there and learned ourselves. And then what we did is we built concepts, and then we presented the concepts back to the organization on a weekly basis. We were running a roadshow where even individuals were coming on to demos that I'd built myself, where they could come in and see firsthand and speak to me and go, Rich, why is this valuable? What does this mean? And then our developers were running competitions themselves to go, let me see what I can build. Let's see what this creative idea could be. And everyone in the organization had the accessibility to this because there was no red tape and there was no grey mist. We were very open to say, we're trying to be innovative, we're trying to be creative, but we want everyone to have accessibility to that. At the same time, working with partners like Salesforce, like AWS, or any of these organizations, Google's fantastic. There is an abundance of accessible tools, training, tips, guidance. Even if you just go into the back end of any LLM, you've got training modules that enable people to have access to it free of charge.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rich. Barry, I think that's a really good question. So I'll put the same one to you about AI literacy amongst employees. How are you fostering it at Salesforce and Slack?
I'll just start by saying that if there's a robot out there that wants to take on some of the tasks that I'm having to deal with right now, more than happy to pass them over to that particular robot. I was at TDX last week, so I'm playing catch up on a lot of things right now. And any robots that want to apply to do some of my tasks, please do so. Yeah, it's a really interesting one. There's a couple of different ways. So I can start. There's probably two ways that I talk about how to foster it. I'd say there's tools that people are using every day, right? So I'll stick my Slack hat on and I'll say with Slack, right? If you're using Slack right now, I would question, if you're using Slack, why are you not using AI in Slack, right? Slack has AI search in there, so if you want to search the search bar, you can pretty much get any answer to any question that you can have about Slack and about Salesforce right in Slack that will be sourced, that will be referenced, so it's not coming back with hallucinations and so on. You can have recaps of channels that we're in. If you're in Slack, you probably have loads of different channels. There's probably threads and channels that you haven't gone into in a week. You can hit a recap and it'll pull out the most salient points from that particular thread, right? My point is not a pitch around Slack. It's that if you put AI into the flow of work in tools that people are already familiar with, the adoption curve, or the adoption, I guess, hump isn't as high. It's not, the hurdle isn't as high for people to get on because they're familiar with what they should be experiencing, and then they can see the productivity go through the roof in terms of responses that they can get, right? Like for me, I worked in an organization where we used Slack, but we didn't have AI enabled. When I joined and we had AI enabled, I don't know how I'd ever go back, right? Like just the speed of innovation here and so on, staying on top of things. I ask Slack questions and it will come back to me with the answers, right? And I know them answers are correct because I can see them sourced, right? So that's one way to do it. Put it into the flow of work for people. The other way is around fostering AI adoption is show people the output, right? Like a lot of people, particularly with AI, really just want to see the output, and then they'll make a decision on wow, is this a big thing for my business? Can this change how I fundamentally do my business, right? And so if you take Salesforce as an example, and I'd encourage anybody on the call here to go on to the website, but we have help.salesforce.com, right? And that's where all of our help queries go into, right? If you go on there, you will see how agents are pretty much closing the majority of the tickets that Salesforce get. And there's a see how it's done button you can click in there, and it'll give you all the reports. Why am I saying that? Because we're showing our customers that we're deploying agents and AI in Salesforce on probably one of the most sensitive things that you can, take from a customer, which is their problem, and solving that. Like on average, there's about 85% of them issues are solved by an agent, right? So if you can convince people that that's what they'll be doing, that's the stuff that an agent can take away from them, then you can talk to them then about focusing on more strategic things, maybe help and support engineering and product to make your service offering a lot better. Maybe focusing on the higher, I guess the higher priority issues, and giving them the focus and the time that they need to spend on it rather than rushing through it. And even then, using AI and agents to support solving that problem. I've never worked with a customer service agent who's wanted to get to the root cause analysis before they have the problem fixed. The quicker you get the problem closed, you share the root cause analysis, and then it's done. Customers just want the problem closed. So I guess, look, in summary, two things. Give them AI where they work, in their flow of work, so they can adopt it and they can use it every day. But then for the others in different departments and so on, or maybe you're trying to sell your service or whatever else, show them the output, show them the promise of the output, and evidence it as well.
Okay. A lot of other questions have come in about AI. I realize that it's a very interesting topic, but there is something that I promised right at the top that we would talk about, which was the challenges for UK companies in the market at the moment. So I want to do that in the last, we've got 8 minutes before we end the webinar. So I want to go over these quite quickly. And if we have time, we'll come back to some of the other AI audience questions. So let's head over to Rich. I think the two big challenges, correct me if I'm wrong, in the market at the moment are the skills gap is a big one. And also a lot of companies are facing tool sprawl, especially those that have grown by acquisition. So I would love to know what you've done at EPOS now or what your advice is to counter both of those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. You are not wrong. EPOS now is growing around 70% year over year, and we're deploying 10 to 15 new products in new markets pretty much every quarter. What have we done? I think it's governance policy. So when we talk about our technology stack and our architecture, each part of our tech structure has a very clearly governed architecture diagram. And each of them have a governance structure around the platforms that we utilize to enable us to then provide the services we operate. So it's very clear. I'll take, just because Barry's on the call, but if I take our CRM strategy, what we would do is we will look at Salesforce is our partner for our CRM. We will then look at the whole offering of Salesforce and see how we can leverage all the opportunities and the relationships, be that from the basket checkout experience, be that to employee communication and the utilization of Slack, to how can we utilize our billing engine. And we would then do that across all of our ecosystem that we have as an organization. And we will heavily governance that, where any change to the framework that exists typically comes back to the board, and we will review any amendments to that structure before we go out there and go and acquire new software for new solutions for new problems. Because what we typically find, again, hiring globally, is individuals have a personal preference for a particular tool dependent on a particular market. And before you know it, you've got subscriptions around the world doing slightly different things when you've got one particular platform that can offer a combined service. So I think the first point there is architecture and governance is the first learning from our perspective. And then we also undertake a quarterly audit. And by quarterly audit, what we do is we look at our architecture and our governance strategy, and we overlay this with how it's actually operating in reality. And our CTO will present that back to the board and say, look, here's our architecture. Here's what we agreed last time. Here's what the structure looks like. Here is a list of recommendations we want to agree to enable us to do adoption. And that could be, again, I don't want to go back to the AI topic, but if we're using an AI particular tool, this is the one we're going to pick, this is why, and this is how it plugs into the various touch points in the org.
Great. Thanks, Rich. Barry, I'm going to ask you the same question then. We've got tool sprawl, we've got the skills gap. Any other big challenges that you can think of that are facing the industry? How is Salesforce and Slack handling them? Or what is your advice for other companies to handle them?
I think that the skills gap and the IT sprawl, two huge ones. I think the other thing is, we're probably at a stage now where AI needs to prove itself, that it actually needs to, deliver value and measurable impact, right? I think it's that kind of convince me stage that we're coming to now, right? Everybody's kind of enjoyed it, played around with it, and then maybe trying to go, well, how do we industrialize this? And I think looking at it through the lens of IT sprawl, looking at it through the lens of the skills gap is the right way to do it. I think when you think of the skills shortages that there are, they're not, I shouldn't probably use this phrase, but it's the only one that comes to mind. It's not legacy skills that are in shortage, right? It's all the future looking skills that everybody wants, right? It's kind of them development, it's the AI, it's all them types of, future looking skills that are needed. And I think AI can help us kind of close that knowledge gap. I think, Richard, you used that phrase earlier on around the knowledge gap. I think where we see the ability to close that gap, I think is huge when it comes to AI, because AI can ingest and digest way more than we can in a far quicker fashion, so that we can just ask it a question and it can close that gap right now, right? Rather than trying to go to university and trying to learn all this type of stuff, right? The knowledge gap closes very quickly. When I think of CIOs and CTOs, right? They have to, and CISOs, right? They go to universities, they have a huge amount of experience before they even get into the role of a CISO. And then they're responsible for making sure that their organization is secure, right? They're up against a hacker that could be from 10 years of age to 90 years of age, who only needs a computer and gets lucky once with the most recent, flaw that's found out there, right? So I think AI can help close that gap significantly. And I think when, back to what we talked about earlier about bringing people from the education system into your business, I think they're the type of people who will be able to see organizations in a completely different way, right? IT sprawl, yes, is a big challenge and a big issue, and consolidation absolutely is something that organizations should always be looking to do, right? Because you don't want to have too many islands everywhere. But if you have somebody looking at it through a completely different lens, they might go, well, once it's integrated, and we can see what we have, then maybe it's not such a big problem, right? So I think there's loads of different ways to look at different things, but I'd say the skills shortage is probably the biggest one. The data sprawl and the IT sprawl, yes, it's big and it's a problem, but I think the skills is going to be the biggest problem.
Okay. Look, we've got enough questions flooding in here that we could spend another hour answering them. So obviously we don't have time for that, unfortunately. We will pass all of these questions on to Rich and Barry and your contact details if you've asked a question after the webinar, so they can get back to you. However, one has come in that I think is a really great wrap-up question that I'm going to ask both of you. Austin has asked, what are the key AI trends to watch in 2025? So Barry, I'll go to you and then over to Rich.
Key AI trends, I would say personalization of AI agents is going to become come even more to the fore. The access to data, the access to insights that agents will have and AI will have, and being able then to focus that right on Richard's needs depending on what he wants, or Tom's needs depending on what he wants, I think is going to be a big one. We're already doing that at Salesforce. So if you go to that help page that I mentioned before, and if your issue or your conversation gets handed off to a human, right, because it's digital labor, people working alongside with agents, then what you find is you log into Salesforce, and then that agent who's handing you off to the human can see your entire universe of what you have with Salesforce and can actually get a very customized and personalized view just to your particular issue based on what you have, based on, you know, the different upgrades, downgrades, expansions, contractions, whatever you may have done with us in the past. So that's just doing that for that particular person in a particular org. Imagine then applying that to the customized journey for, you know, marketing, for online purchases and so on, right? Getting that highly personalized, but highly personalized and highly customized experience. I think that's going to be one that a lot of people will be looking for over the next while.
Great, thanks, Barry. Richard, over to you.
I think it's going to be a boring 2025. just putting it out there. I think there's a lot of hype around AI for 2025. I agree with everything that Barry said. I think we've all been there when there's a new AI release that's come out and we've all sat there and played with the technology and we go, this is amazing. I think in reality, what you're going to see is more and more LLMs that are becoming gradually more and more powerful and more capable. And I think, you know, we all know that the ability of leveraging more artificial intelligence is governed by the compute power that exists. And I think there's a lot of technological hurdles that will need to take place to embrace the hype of AI that everyone kind of sees is ahead of us. And I believe that will happen. I just don't think it will happen this year. I think what I would anticipate this year, not only do the models get more powerful, more capable, but I think this year could be the opportunity of escaping the chat. And by escaping the chat, I think what you typically find with most utilized AI tools is there is a chat interface that provides guidance and instruction that enables them to go off and do a particular task on behalf of a person. And especially the conversations I have, having built our own AI agents in-house, the question we always have is, well, this is great, but, you know, I have to tell it what to do. It doesn't autonomously pick the right decision based on the scenario. I think there'll be a big push to have AI technology that is independent of chat, independent of a particular model, where they have the ability of adding value autonomously. That's what I will be particularly excited to see as the models get more and more powerful. And I think you've seen that with the likes of, you know, My Eyes being able to visually input data into platforms to build knowledge, build capabilities. It started with text, it moved to images, it moved to videos. Real-time videos will be, you know, inevitable. But I think you're going to see greater adoption, greater power of the models themselves, and autonomous utilization without the chat interface being utilized. So just to clarify what we're doing at EPOS now, we, again, going back to the intent point, we built our psychic model. The purpose of the psychic model is we want SMEs, entrepreneurs, to run their business successfully. So what we've done is we've utilized all the data from our platform of the 85,000 active merchants we have today to then provide real-time insights to our merchants. Like, you may be making a bad decision here, try this. But again, what we've done so far is very much a chat-based interface rather than having a fully native, real-time integrated platform that is autonomous and flowing as if it's co-pilot for an SME. That's kind of where we're pushing towards. I think many organizations will do the same.
All right. Thank you, Rich. And thank you, Barry, as well. And to our audience, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to just slightly disagree. My own opinion on AI in 2025 is we saw it with DeepSeek in January, the rise of open source AI. That's my prediction for 2025. Right. So with that, we have come, unfortunately, to the end of our time. As I said, all your questions will be passed on to Richard and to Barry so they can answer them themselves offline. With that, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Barry, and audience. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again very soon.